Good evening to everybody who's joined us today, to all the educators. The Union Cabinet approved the National Education Policy 2020 on July 29. The new policy, which replaces the 34-year-old policy of 1986, aims to pave way for transformational reforms in schools and higher education systems in the country. Mindler, in collaboration with Education World India, brings to you a panel discussion that will be looking in depth at various pointers of the NAP and its impact on higher education. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the industry stalwarts, Mr. Dilip Thakur, who's going to be moderating our session. So Mr. Dilip Thakur is the publisher, editor of Education World and Parents World. He's also, which is one of the largest first education magazines and first education news and analysis magazine with the national readership comprising academics, parents, and high school students. Their estimated readership is about 1 million across the country. Earlier, he was the founding editor of Business India and Business World, India's first two business magazines, which catalyzed the economy's liberalization and deregulation initiative of 1991. We welcome you as well as all the other panelists. I give it to Mr. Dilip Thakur from here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Isha. Yes, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and our audience around the country, around the world. This is a very interesting subject we're going to talk about. Is new education policy, as Isha told you. And our subject today is going to be NEP 2020 and higher education, impact and opportunities. Just to give you a little intro and a background to India's higher education scene, India has 40,000 colleges, 950 universities, of which 412 are state universities, 361 are private universities, and 124 are deemed universities. That's an animal which I think only the bureaucrats use, but actually they're private universities. But alas, unfortunately, not even one of our universities is ranked among the top 300 by Times Higher Education in their World University Rankings 2020. And the QS rankings is a bit more generous. In their 2020 ranking, I think IIT Bombay is ranked is the highest ranked from India, number 152. Indian Institute of Science is 184. Indian is IIT Delhi 182, and IIT Kharagpur 281. And the outcome of this poor rankings is also reflected in several studies which show that Indian graduates fare very badly in the job market. According to a McKinsey Institute's study done several years ago, 75% of all Indian graduates are not eligible for, are not sufficiently qualified for employment in Indian or foreign multinationals. And a Delhi-based company called the Aspiring Minds is, in fact, ranks our graduates even lower, say 85% of them are not suitable for employment in self-respecting Indian or foreign multinationals. So this is a rather grim scenario, and obviously India's higher education system urgently needs reformation. And the NER has set some ambitious targets. The NEP, sorry, has set some ambitious targets. They want the GER, that is the enrollment ratio, general enrollment ratio, to go up from the current around about 25% to 50% by the year 2035. That means you have to create an additional capacity in higher education institutions of 35 million seats. So against this backdrop, now we have with us a very distinguished panel whom I'll introduce one by one, and I'm sure they are going to enlighten us as to how to do. First, let me introduce General M. Who's Raj going first? Okay, Raj. First, let me introduce Dr. C. Raj Kumar, who's a very impressive CV. He's an alumnus of Loyola College, Madras, Delhi University, Oxford University, Harvard University, Hong Kong University. He's the founding chancellor of the O.P. Jindal Global University in Sonipat, Haryana, was declared an eminent institution of eminence by the government of India. JGU, as I said earlier, is ranked India's #1 private university in the World University rankings of the well-reputed London-based Quacquarelli-Simmons, QS, and is among the top 5 in our own Education World India rankings. Dr. Rajkumar is a preeminent legal scholar, has also authored and co-authored 7 books, including The Future of Indian Universities 2017, Education President, Institution Building for National Building 2016, Corruption, Human Rights in India 2011, among others. Moreover, during the COVID-19 induced national lockdown, Dr. Rajkumar has conducted and chaired over 200 webinars, education-focused webinars. And Jindal Global University has gone several better and produced or conducted over 750 webinars. So welcome, Dr. Rajkumar. It's a great pleasure, of course. He's a dynamo and a man who's set a cracking pace in Indian higher education. Our next guest is General Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, Vice Chancellor of the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He's the Vice Chancellor, and which is of India's #1 private universities, according to the Education World India Private Education Education World India Private Higher Education rankings for the past 4 years. He's a graduate of the Mysore Medical College, commissioned in the Army Medical Corps in '79. He's an eminent and established a reputation, outstanding ENT surgeon, and trained generations of undergraduate and postgraduate students in Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, serving all academic positions from reader to dean in AFMC and founding the Department of Medical Education Technology at AFMC. And he served in the Armed Forces for 38 years with distinction and is a Vishisht Seva Medal awardee. After serving in the Armed Forces for 38 years, Dr. Venkatesh was appointed Vice Chancellor of the Sikkim Manipal University in 2017. And after completing his 3-year term on June 30 this year, he was appointed Vice Chancellor of Manipal Academy of Higher Education. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much for sparing your time to be with us here today. And we look forward to your opinions on the subject that we're going to discuss today. Our next guest is, Dr. Rishikesha Krishnan. He's an alumnus of, also a very impressive CV, an alumnus of IIT Kanpur, Stanford University, IIM Ahmedabad. Dr. Krishnan is a director and professor of strategy at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He was the former director, also the former director of the Indian Institute of Management, Indore. He began his academic career immediately after graduation at the IIM Bangalore in 1996 and served this top-ranked B school for 18 years before he was appointed director of IIM Indore, which is now also routinely ranked among the top 5 B schools in India. In 2019, that's last year, he was recalled to IIMB as Professor of Business Strategy and appointed Director of IIMB last month, that's in July. IIMB, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you, is India's #1 B school according to the Financial Times London ranking. And it's ranked globally number 27, a very high ranking, a very impressive ranking. In fact, it's overtaken the Indian School of Business, which is usually ranked very high in the Financial Times ranking. So welcome, sir. We're very pleased to have you here today, and we look forward to your views and on the higher education scenario in India. Last but by no means least is Dr. Yogeshwar Costa, who's the provost, that is the vice chancellor of Marwadi University, Rajkot. Dr. Costa is an alumnus of Delhi and Stanford universities, awarded his PhD in telecommunications engineering by Jabalpur University in 1998, and has a 10-year record as a distinguished scientist in the Indian Space Research Organization, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. In 2003, Dr. Costa migrated from the space industry to engineering education to serve as the principal of the Charotar Institute of Technology, Gujarat, and later 2008 to 2010 as Dean of the Faculty of Engineering Technology at Charotar University of Science and Technology at a small village called Changa in Gujarat. Subsequently, he's the founding provost or vice chancellor of the newly established in 2016 Marwadi University, Rajkot, which has an aggregate enrollment of 8,500 students mentored by 550 faculty. And these students are from around 30 countries around the world. Very good for a merely 4-year university. So gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. And the way I'll proceed in the same way that we called out our guests here today. Let's start with Dr. Rajkumar. Dr. Rajkumar, of course, he's an experienced webinar expert. So you've written that on the whole, you've appreciated the national education policy in your several writings, and you think the spirit that you discern in a policy of regulatory reform is you discern a spirit in the policy. Would you like to say what you like about the policy in terms of reforming higher education in India?
Thank you very much, Dilip, for this opportunity, and truly humbled by the distinguished presence of inspiring institutional leaders across the country. I've written about it. I've very warmly welcomed the National Education Policy 2020. I'm deeply inspired by its vision, its aspiration, its ability to seek transformation, and even recognizing some of the difficult challenges and complexities that are involved. So if I were to quickly say what I really like about it, is that first of all, it has talked about the idea of a world-class education system. Most of the time, the discourse in India has always been trying to address the issue of balancing between how do we achieve excellence and how do we also promote expansion and inclusion. And in this NEP, very clearly, the vision of a world-class education has been highlighted. The second thing which I really like about is that it has focused on multidisciplinarity and liberal education with strong emphasis on humanities and social sciences, while not compromising the need for promoting STEM and medicine. This is again something which we have been lamenting for a very long time. It has addressed that as well. The third thing, which I am one of the things that all of us talk about it, particularly in higher education, is the need for fundamental regulatory reforms. Barring the Medical Council of India and the Bar Council of India, it has brought into the fold a comprehensive higher education institution. Now, the flip side of this aspect, and I will say that, and I know you will be concerned about, is that
we'll come back. We'll do a second round on that. Let's also and do.
So I want to end by saying that the focus on regulatory reform is desirable, and it alone can help us take us to the next level of higher education excellence in India.
Okay, thanks, Raj. Now, General Dr. Venkatesh, what do you like about the policy? We'll do the downside in the next round.
Okay. Thank you once again for this opportunity and sharing the dais with some of the luminaries of our country. Other than what Dr. Rajkumar mentioned, I think I would, bring into focus 2-3 other issues. One is, I think emphasizing on the fact that now this policy, is now aiming at putting Indian higher education at the global level and to compete with the global standards. Therefore, one important thing that it talks about is internationalization. And second important thing, I think, other than what Dr. Rajkumar mentioned, is about the focus on research. This is something which is very important. And the third point is about technology adoption. These three things are going to drive and help Indian universities or Indian higher education institutions towards being competitive at the global level, and perhaps help us over the next 5, 7, 10 years to rise higher in the world rankings, and also become one of the favored destination for international students, not necessarily looking at Western world. I'm not necessarily looking at Western world. International students from less serviced, nations of the world, I think we would be servicing them in a far better fashion than what the Western world would be doing at the present time. So these are the three major, highlights, other than what Dr. Rajkumar mentioned. I think these are very important reforms that are in the process. And of course, all these things will depend upon how much of autonomy the higher education institutions are going to get with these reforms in terms of administration.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that later. So thank you very much. Dr. Krishnan?
Yeah, so I would broadly agree with what the earlier speakers said. Just add a couple of points. I like the emphasis on accreditation rather than the kind of regulation that's in place today. The emphasis on research is, of course, very welcome indeed. Certainly, the idea of having a multidisciplinary university in every district of the country so that students across the country can access high quality higher education is most welcome. So I think on almost all dimensions, it's a great document as far as higher education is concerned. Of course, the key challenges are in implementation, and I hope we'll come back to that later in the discussion.
I think when we discussed earlier, you also mentioned you liked something about the digital literacy emphasis in the...
Yeah, of course. I think Dr. Venkatesh mentioned the digital part. That, of course, is most welcome as
yes, well. And the transfer of credits, which you mentioned. Thank you, sir. Very kind. We look forward to proceeding further with this. Dr. Costa, now, when we were discussing, we are having a preliminary discussion, you said, anyway, tell us first what you like about the policy.
Well, I think the learned people here who are participating with sufficient experience and immersion have already initiated most of the attributes associated with the policy. But however, my opinion has been asked, so I will share something. I think one thing is our, very ancient language, Sanskrit, that has been introduced and it has brought to its rightful place. I think that is something very good. The second thing is the importance of nutrition, particularly with this, as far as the education is concerned and how it relates for acquisition of knowledge and learning. The nutrition is very important. So I think that has also been introduced in the education. And it has been given sufficient importance. That's good. The other thing is that this policy is basically a well-knitted straight line that actually is suitcased as a payload, which will be launched in a manner powered by all these educational institutions across the country through its rules and regulations, so that it can actually transfer and hit the $5 trillion economy market, right? So that's where, so it's a straight line launch. And I think it's perfect because I hail from the space industry, and that's why I'm used to talking to words like payloads and things like that. So therefore, this is what it is. It's a suitcase. The other important, very important thing here is what is there in the policy is the coding part, which is basically taken right at the school level. So the entry into the professional level, the higher education, will be more humble and smoother as far as the minimum digital literacy skill is concerned. So I think coding, wherein they're talking about language, math, and coding. Now, if I decode these three words, then what it literally means is language means they're talking about the language which is understood by the machines. And as far as math is concerned, it is very important because that's the algorithm which is basically going to be coded in the machine so that it can actually produce an output function. Now, these things are important. Now, the reason why this is important is, let me just finish. The reason why this is important is because in the future, just like we go to the vegetable market, and if I want to prepare biryani, then I buy this vegetable, this vegetable, this vegetable, that oil, and etc., and come back and then suitcase myself to it, because the biryani of Delhi and biryani of Bangalore is very different. But then the elements are the same, the principles are the same. So what is happening is there will be an array, a plethora of explosion of small digital functional products in the market. Now, these products will be assembled in a very innovative and creative manner by this schoolites people who are actually coming, and they will be able to build small devices because they'll be totally, free from everything. Nothing is there. They're just bare. They have the capabilities. They have the functions. You need to actually wire them. You need to actually code them. So in order to arrive at a function. Now, these are the small things which are very important, which will come. And that's the reason. So I think the education policy, right up to the $5 trillion mark economy, they've taken all these perspectives into action. And I'm sure the learned people here will agree to what I'm telling. So this is what I like about it. So if you look at it, you can actually correlate all these tipping points with Takshila, Nalanda, Vallabhi, and all those things which existed of these institutions many, many years back, but in a different way, right? So this is what it is. So this is what I like about the policy. It is good. And I'm sure that, it will be able to embark upon our, belief that we'll be able to become a superpower.
So essentially you're saying that it's going to develop our latent human resources very well. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's go to the other side. There are, according to me, I've as you know, I have my quite strong views. If you've read our latest issue of Education World, but of course, I have some views. One of the things that perhaps disturbs me, Raj, is that, while you say that the regulation system is very good, but, the amount of regulatory bodies that the new policy, I've just noted the name, HECI, NHREC, NAC, HEGC, GCEC, HEQF, PSDB, it's a bit frightening to a layperson like me that you should, and I envisage that eminent chancellors and leaders of education like you will be spending a lot of time answering to these bodies who may be manned or womaned, as it were, by not sufficiently qualified people, and it can become a bureaucratic maze. So what's your comment on that?
Thank you, Dilip. Dilip, I am Vice Chancellor and not Chancellor, so I should correct you on that.
Sorry.
No, so to say, listen, the fact remains that there is a historically evolved distrust between all stakeholders in institutions in India. The reality is the government and government agencies have not trusted institutions. Institutions have enough reasons not to trust government, and possibly there are other stakeholders, including even faculty, who may not necessarily trust the institution, and students who might have different types of opinions about these stakeholders. So let's at least recognize that the NEP talks about academic freedom, autonomy, and independence. The most important departure from the past is it is actually conceived of the idea of an evolutionary process in which autonomy and independence ought to be earned. The first step in that process was, and I'm sure Dr. Krishnan will highlight more, is that some time ago, a couple of years ago, the IIMs were given certain amount of autonomy in some of their decision-making process. That proceeded further with the principle of graded autonomy, in which 52 Indian universities were given autonomy. We were one among them, and public and private universities as well. And then the Institute of Eminence, which again identified 10+10 public and private, and envisaged greater autonomy, more than the graded autonomy. And then, of course, now the NEP in its totality is conceiving of a tighter regulation. I entirely agree with your concern that the biggest challenge has been that the Indian higher education system has been over-regulated and under-governed. So the question is, to what extent the promise of NEP, the vision and aspiration of NEP, will actually get implemented when it comes to actual legislation and policy making, where implementation of the policy that has been envisaged.
Isn't there a bit of a contradiction or a danger that, autonomy, actually setting up so many bodies is actually endangering the autonomy of
there is that, but Dilip, I think it's very important from a regulatory standpoint. As a lawyer, I'm speaking now. It's always a tough thing to recognize that there are going to be institutions which need to be ensured that they are maintaining good standards. So the principle that has been conceived here in all of this evolution is that autonomy is not assumed, but you need to earn it. Some degree of autonomy you need to constantly earn. At that continuum in which an institution reaches its somewhat of a pinnacle, you end up having more autonomy. In a way, it's also about institutions demonstrating their own achievements, their own abilities, their capabilities, and their pursuit of excellence, which ultimately leads to greater autonomy and independence. But the problem in this approach is, and that's where the question of arbitrary decision-making when it comes to regulations can affect and undermine even the institutions which are in the formative phase of its evolution. So in some ways, until and unless, and I can talk more about it later, but we need an attitudinal change among the bureaucrats, civil servants, and the regulatory bodies. It cannot be as if that everything is about permission and approval and constantly trying to tell what universities and academic institutions should be doing.
The danger is who's sitting in judgment while you're earning your spurs, as it were. So I have some skepticism about the kind of people who are going to be awarding people graded autonomy. There's that danger. Anyway, it's a very good answer. Thanks a lot, Raj. I mean, it clarifies a lot of things. And I commend you for your optimism on this. General, one of the things that General Dr. Venkatesh, what you talked about is, that you see in this policy like a strong drive towards internationalization. And Manipal University, of course, is like the pioneer in international education. I don't know if you're aware, gentlemen, that 25% of all the doctors in Malaysia have been qualified and certified by Manipal University over the last, some 30, 40 years. So do you think that, can you spell out what you like in the policy, which you believe is going to spur internationalization?
Yeah, very interesting question. Thank you very much. I accept that Manipal has been one of the pioneers of internationalization, began in the early 90s when we got a lot of international students, and where the medical education was also, people used to come and train here from South Africa, from Sri Lanka, and from Malaysia. And we also set up medical school in Malaysia. And yes, there it started. And then that process has continued. And today, I think we are amongst one of the better, executors of internationalization. In that terms, we have close to 200 international collaborations and almost 10 of them in the top 50 and almost 25 of them in the top 100 universities of the world. We are collaborating in some way or the other. But the point is, over a period of time, what has happened is, there have been too many questions asked about internationalization. Now, the new policy at least promises to set the higher education institutions free of all these things. At least what Dr. Rajkumar said, at least the better ones, higher ranked, higher accredited ones will be free of, these, questions and distrust that you have spoken about. This is something which I have always felt, that there is a distrust, and this distrust has to diminish to a great extent. I'm not saying who is right, who is wrong. Perhaps the HEIs have also been in their own right, been wrong at many times. And they have not earned, or they did things wrong which shouldn't have been done, and there was over-regulation without any doubt. And one point I would like to contradict when you said that the regulation which the government is proposing is a much simpler form of regulation. I'm sure that Dr. Rajkumar will agree with that. Just the 4 verticals which the main regulator will be controlling has so far been. We had about 15 regulators. And all these 4 functions were more than 15. All of them were being done by a single regulator. Ethics was also looked at one, accreditation was also looked at one, recognition was also looked at the same regulator. There was a lot of overlap and there was a bias. At least the present policy, at least in the regulation front, says that it would be transparent, it would be open, and most of it would be online. So we expect that the visit and inspection Raj would come to an end. Of course, all these things, the proof of the pudding is in eating. Let us have the implementation, and then let us see who will man these regulatory bodies in that sense. I agree with you when you say if the same people who are manning the UGCs, AICTs, and various other regulatory bodies find a place there, the mindset change would be a little difficult, despite the policy being there. In terms of internationalization, I think it opens up a new vistas. It also definitely says that some of the better Indian universities will be allowed to open campuses abroad. And that is a very welcome step. we could look at, internationalizing in that sense. And second important thing is about, more freedom to offer, online programs. This is something which is good, that our own online programs, well-structured ones, perhaps will find a good market in international arena. The third important thing is about facilitation between student mobility. One thing very important that the document speaks about it, credit transfer, which is earned even in international universities or international HEIs and domestic HEIs. We could, after curriculum matching, we could take those credits and give credit to that, and the student mobility will be much better. And also it opens up a lot of research opportunities. The first step would be the student mobility, and second would be the faculty mobility, then the network enlarges, and perhaps that is when collaborative research, interdisciplinary research, and collaborative publications will come in at the highest rate.
So the policy also talks about allowing foreign universities to establish campuses in India.
Yes, yes.
But it says subject to the same rules and regulations as applicable to Indian universities. Do you believe that for them, the kind of regulations which you think are perhaps normative, are perhaps very unusual? Do you think that foreign universities will establish campuses in India?
In the medium term, I don't expect them to come to India. They will look at how the policy is being implemented, what were the new norms that have been established, how it is being taken forward in that current sense. So in the medium term, 5-7 years, I don't expect, even if it is allowed, other than few adventurers. The government, in the policy is very clear, they will allow only top 100 universities. Yes. So they would have a cautious approach, and we need to look at what they're going to, when the regulations are going to come in those regard, whether they would want a full-fledged foreign university to establish its own campus, or they would allow collaboration with existing universities as a in a collaborative fashion. This is something which will be of interest to watch.
Yeah, so it's probably going to be the latter. They'll probably collaborate with local university before they. Yeah. That's what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, there are both threats and opportunities in this. Threats would be if they establish their own campuses, there would be migration of our own, faculty, because they would perhaps their educational opportunity would be priced at a much higher level, and they would be able to afford to pay a much higher salaries to our own people. That is one threat that I foresee. Second issue is about the migration of students themselves. With this credit transfer policy being available, immediately they'll be flocking out from our own institution to these foreign institutions of refuge, if it is allowed that they establish their own campuses. These are some of the threats that we need to keep in mind. However, it's a welcome policy. We need to become competitive. We should never be looking at ourselves as, that we are not good enough at that level. I'm sure this opportunity will help us grow, will help us compete. May not happen in the immediate medium term, but I look at in a 10-year perspective, we will be very good.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Krishnan, one of the things that you mentioned while we were discussing in our preliminary discussion is that you like the proposal for multidisciplinary universities and and perhaps you suggested before that happens, because that's going to take some time, there should be a greater coordination between universities already in India. I think that's one of the interesting points you mentioned.
Yes, indeed, Dilip. If you look at a city like Bangalore, we have the National Law School, we have Indian Institute of Science, we have IIM, we have IIIT. And while, of course, we do occasionally attend each other's seminars, there's not much formal collaboration between these institutions. So it would be wonderful as a first step to enable multidisciplinarity if we could actually have students from these institutions attending classes in other institutions. And what the COVID pandemic has shown us is that a lot of teaching can be done online. So this also overcomes the problems of cutting across Bangalore's terrible traffic in order to attend classes. We could actually do lots of the classes online, and of course have periodic opportunities for the students to come and meet each other. So I'm hoping that a first step for an institute like IIM, which is at least at the moment primarily a single discipline university or a single disciplinary institution, we would be able to collaborate with others to offer multidisciplinarity.
Yes. And I don't think you were also saying that you don't expect much over-regulation of the IIM because IIM is already substantially, how do you say, autonomous. You're quite happy with the amount of autonomy that the IIMs already have, and IMB in particular.
I think IIMs have been a slightly odd animal in this whole zoo of higher education in India. We have largely been outside the traditional regulatory framework. In a way, we became more part of the regular framework when the IIM Act came into effect a couple of years ago, because we now got more formal structures and policies and so on. But yes, I would agree with you in general that we have always had a fair degree of autonomy. On the academic side, we've had almost complete autonomy right since inception. And now we have autonomy on several other dimensions as well. I'm hoping that the current setup for IIMs in terms of regulation will continue and that the autonomy we enjoy will sustain.
Thank you, sir. Very enlightening. Thank you. Dr. Costa. Now, one of the things that we discussed, and which I think you mentioned in your preliminary remarks, is that perhaps what you are happy about in the new policy is the emphasis that is made on our heritage, our spiritual heritage, our academic heritage, and going back into the past and trying to link up with the past and taking education continuum into the future. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate a bit on that?
I think we initially started our journey with the agricultural revolution, wherein hands were...
I think you need to speak up a bit, doctor.
Yeah. We initially started with our journey,
yes,
the agricultural revolution, as everybody knows, where hands were more important. And as time evolved, knowledge was discovered and then later on translated into physical realities. And then we had the first industrial revolution and the Ford T in 1908. And then we had the second industrial revolution. So that was the mechanization. And then we had electricity started in producing the goods and services. And then we had the digital revolution where we had the automation. And now we are in the cyber physical revolution. So what is happening, if you look at the trailing edge of this journey, earlier it was wholesome, right? So, you know, we started with sun and moon, then clock and whistle and so on and so forth. And later on, now everything has almost vanished. What I'm trying to say is that we have 4 aspects of knowledge. Number 1 is associated with the mental. The second one is the physical. The third one is the emotional. And the fourth one is the spiritual. Now, if you look at this, somewhere across the line, the bandwidth of operation was about conversion into materialistic aspects. So I say that I am rich because I have my earth, my species, trees, plants, water, and minerals. I'm not breaking down the mountains to actually extract minerals. I'm not breaking down the rivers to make canals, and so on and so forth. So this is what happened. And so it was a materialistic revolution. Then second, what happened is the knowledge was actually pitched across all this. So you had knowledge given by educational institutions, and that knowledge associated with the skills so that they can make the students employable, right? So that was there. So therefore, this is how the revolution and this everything was built.
But so have you introduced any specific programs of the type that which are innovative in this context?
Yes, exactly. So what happens is this was the operational bandwidth there. What happened was the emotional component was not present. And that is where we introduced in our university the 3-tier teaching learning structure, which was about making of the mind. And making of the mind is for the particular good science. If you want to become an engineer, you're a doctor, you're a scientist, you're an economist, you're manager, whatever, right? So it was about making of the mind for the purpose of the market and thereby being mindful. So what is happening is we are talking about education to profession, and then profession joyfully taking on the profession and being joyful, right? And living a life which is more joyful, right? So that is what it was about. So our education, which we call as 360, I mean, there are various nomenclatures are there, which you call. So it is about making of the mind for the purpose of market and thereby being in mindful state. So that is what our three M's is all about. Now, if you look at this model, this is where we are. So now if you look at, first we wanted hands, then we had heads. Okay, then the third revolution, which is the transitory, we talked about innovation, augmentation, right? Okay, then we talked about creativity. The transition from there, the fourth one, which we are coming, right? It is about energy, it is about environment, it is about enterprise, etc. and things like that. We are talking about that transition where we are consciousness is developing. So that is where we are trying to look at it. So now what is happening is curriculum is not important. What is important is imagination. So let me redefine. Imagination is the next new curriculum. And where is it? It is in the minds of the student. And that is where your transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary transition comes in universities and institutions, right? That is where the transition is. So you are seeing that the Gurukul, which was complete by when McCloy came in and all those things was there, and he destroyed all the 450 Gurukulas and all those things, and then we had the verticals coming in. So independent verticals. Now the verticals are again breaking down and coming towards the web-based structure.
So to sum up, your graduate is going to be a joyful person who's able to get joy out of the learning that he'll get in your university. Am I right?
Yes, yeah, but the way of getting joy out of learning actually requires a structural change in the design. It requires a submission of curriculum agreement between two parties, the industries, the teachers and the students, wherein the students is more cared. And then the kind of life he wants to live. So there is a joyful mapping of his needs, his desires, right, which are more green. Right, and that is how it is. So that's what we do it. So that's how the 3-tier structure has been conceived, right? Which is going back to the old days of doing. If you look at Takshila, Vallabha, all those things, we will be in a position to discover those things, provided we are able to.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, thank you. So I wish you good luck. It's an innovative kind of curriculum that you've devised, and hopefully, from what I gather from you, is that the new education policy allows you room to do this.
Yes, definitely. So that is where you can see the transdisciplinary tinge, which is there because of fusion of them. See, we had 1-in-1, then we had 2-in-1, then we had 3-in-1. Now your mobile is all in one.
We very much look forward. We look forward to the kind of graduates you're going to produce, and I'm sure they'll enrich Indian society and Indian life. So Raj, coming back to you, one of the things about Jindal Global University, firstly, it's a global university. And in fact, your university has perhaps the largest number of foreign faculty or expatriate faculty of any university in India. So internationalization is very important to you. So what do you think in this policy, as we were discussing with General Venkatesh, do you think that you're going to, internationalization is going to be allowed to spread its wings, or will this controls the so many organizations that you said and one of the things you have to do is you have to disclose everything on your website under the new policy. This is likely to arouse a lot of resentment amongst faculty in traditional universities, because they're obviously going to be less paid and, So do you think that internationalization is really going to take wings under the new policy?
Thank you, Dilip. Internationalization has been part of our DNA from our founding itself, and global is our middle name. So from the very beginning, not only in terms of hiring full-time faculty members from around the world, over 16% of our faculty members are non-Indian nationals recruited from 34 different countries and regions of the world. And the ones who are from India are people like me and others who have studied in India, worked in India, studied overseas, worked overseas, and have returned to India. So that was part of the imagination from the very beginning. But most importantly, from the standpoint of our internationalization efforts, we built partnerships, substantive ones, with over 250 universities spread across 55 countries. Now, let me say this, that our own partnerships and collaborations have been there even before the NEP. We didn't need the NEP to do what we were doing. But I will say one thing, we were doing, like many of us, I'm sure, we're doing internationalization, but today with the national education policy making a very clear agenda setting role in which internationalization is part of the vision and mission of Indian universities. That kind of creates a signaling and a nudging platform for institutions and even agencies and organizations to accept the important role that internationalization ought to play for the future of Indian higher education. I will also add that there were lots of regulatory, bottlenecks, including efforts, for example, without naming a regulatory body, I will say that without, there were provisions where before even signing an MOU, one needs to get prior permission. And then while India didn't have, any university, the top 100 in the world, the regulatory bodies will insist that Indian universities should sign MOU only with the top 200 in the world, and which of course, unfortunately, ruled out possibilities for some good agriculture universities in India, which would sign and do things with some leading American universities, which unfortunately were not among the top 200 in the world. There were a lot of such flip-flops were happening, but I am happy to see that there has been a change in the mindset when it comes to recognizing internationalization. I also...
But it's top 100 universities, Raj.
Sorry?
The policy still says 100 universities.
No, so the thing is, what is important here is that there are different types of collaborations. So when it comes to creating partnerships where the university is actually going to come here and do certain things, that will require a more substantive engagement. But many things that we do, for example, student exchange, faculty exchange, joint research, joint publications, even dual degree programs, short-term study abroad programs, there's enormous leeway for universities to do what it thinks in its best interest. But as far as the other aspiration of the NEP is concerned, when it comes to trying to bring in brick and mortar physical international campuses into India, I share Lieutenant General Dr. Venkatesh's comments that I don't believe that this is any more a possibility in the Indian context. For a number of reasons. We have already lost that opportunity a decade ago. There was a point of time when universities in the UK, Australia, United States, and possibly even Canada were looking at global campuses, but that possibility no longer exists. In fact, during and post-COVID, the entire phenomenon of global campuses has underwent a tectonic change, and now I do not believe that international universities are expected to build brick and mortar campuses in India. In any case, the good ones are not going to do that. What is going to happen, and that's a good thing for India, is we will be seeing more and more substantive partnerships with Indian institutions, and the existing regulatory hurdles and bottlenecks that are there should be removed, and we need to create more liberal environment. I cannot see any reason why, when two universities, Indian and international, are coming together and have done due diligence as to why they should partner and what ought to be the contours of the partnership, any regulatory body, let alone a government agency, should come in between in determining the nature of that relationship and who should partner with each other. So there, I do believe there is a mindset change, and I'm expecting. But listen, ultimately, that's why the policy is a welcome document, because after the policy, the law and the regulation that is going to come about will actually speak the real language. That's when we will do another colloquium like this to talk about the real story.
Yes, the devil is in the details. We'll see later. Yes. General Venkatesh, one of the things that the policy says, and which you like about the policy, is going to encourage research. But I read in the policy that they're going to set up a national research foundation. To me, as a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me, is that it's centralizing policy. Whereas what I would like to see, and I'm sure you would like to see, is that you conduct your own research and everybody conducts their own research. So is there a bit of a contradiction in the policy and this aspiration?
Yeah, I don't see any contradiction, sir. If you look at it, most of the higher education institutions in India are presently not producing high quality research. That is
Correct.
because of lack of resources. And this new national the policy is going to set up a body which is going to fund this research, and the amount of money
It's
that
only a funding body. It's only a funding.
No, not necessarily a funding body. It will also look at, in an independent fashion, evaluate the projects and the feasibility and the possibility of the project, and fund these projects for quality research. That is one. And the amount of research funding that they're talking about is something very, very interesting. 20,000 crore rupees is the funding that they're looking at. I don't know whether it's for 1 year or it is for this thing, but this is something very big amount of money. In addition, the policy also says that the other public funding agency like ICMR, DBT, DST, agriculture research, they will continue to do their own job. Therefore, this is a very substantial amount of money. And other interesting thing which the policy says, I hope it remains and it is implemented in its true sense, that there will be no distinction in award of these research funds to private and public universities or funding agencies. So this is something, if it is implemented in its true spirit, will be a big boon to quality private public higher education institution which are capable of producing quality research, however, which lack the resources to conduct these research. I think it's a very welcome policy. And the other thing which also the Natural Research Foundation talks about is it is going to facilitate, research between Indian institutions and foreign institutions, and also look at, without any bias, provide merit-based support to research projects. These are very good things. Yeah.
It will depend on who's actually going to be manning this and making the decision within the NRF, right?
The policy is very clear that
Yes.
the people who will be manning it will only man it for 1 year. There'll be frequent changes, and it will be manned independent of any other government control. It will be basically meant perhaps be manned by good researchers and good academicians put together. We assume that. So as a policy, this is an amazing idea. But again, I would share Dr. Rajkumar's view. But it is how it is going to be implemented, what regulations will come inside. So this I think I don't find anything majorly wrong with this policy. Everything is spoken about in the right sense with the right this thing. It is the spirit of implementation which is going to dictate whether this policy is going to be hugely successful or we fall short in certain respects in this regard.
So if you read our cover story in our latest issue, we say visionary charter, educracy shadow. Okay, sir, Dr. Krishnan, if I might come to you. Very interestingly, you talked recently about the transfer of credits. That's a concept. It's not very well understood, and by me anyway. And how is that very beneficial for the improvement of higher education in India?
Well, I was mentioning to you that one good starting point for the new education policy would be to promote collaboration between existing institutions. That becomes much easier the moment you have a common definition for credits and transferability. Because if a student from IIM, for example, could do a course at the National Law School and transfer that credit to IIM, then it would just make life much easier. So I think transfer of credits, which is a part of the new education policy, is something which could, it would really benefit students if it came in much earlier. And these are, many of these things, of course, are not completely new ideas. We've been talking about transfer of credits for several years now. And I'm just hoping, like the previous speakers, that the NEP can be a source of momentum for getting several of these ideas put into practice so that we can actually have them working on the ground.
They're talking about a transfer of credit banks, online bank. Is that right? Is there something in the policy about a credit bank? So,
yeah, I'm less worried about the specific mechanism than that there should be a commonly accepted one. In the US, for example, I don't think they use things like banks. They seem to be able to figure out how to transfer credits. But if bank is the way, I'm fine with that as well. I think if it's a practical solution to addressing the credit transfer problem, well, fine, then let's go with the credit bank.
But isn't essentially a credit, as you call it, isn't it essentially a certificate given by National Law School saying X has completed so-and-so project, so-and-so course with us? Or is it more complicated?
No, so normally credit has a simple definition. In most universities, you get 1 credit if you do 1 hour a week for the entire length of that semester. That's usually translated into 1 credit. So if your class meets for 3 hours a week, it becomes 3 credits and so on. There's a pretty simple way in which classroom hours are converted into credits. Of course, increasingly, we have a lot of non-classroom credits as well, because there could be dissertation courses, project courses, and so on. But they're usually given some equivalence to the classroom courses. And that's how a whole credit structure is built up. And in a credit-based university system, you need a certain minimum number of credits to qualify for award of a degree or diploma or whatever the form of certification is. So it's a pretty standard system. I mean, as they say, it's not really rocket science. Universities across the world follow credit systems. Many of universities in India do as well. And what we, I think, really need is a system where there's a consistent way in which credits are interpreted so that it's easy to transfer credits from one university to another. And there's also a mechanism for transferring. Both of these are important.
So you think the policy enables this or has given momentum to this idea?
Yes, I think like many of the earlier points we made, philosophically, the policy seems to be right on the dot. But now the issue is really how do we make this happen in practice?
In practice, yes. Dr. Costa, I think you had talked about the importance of one of the infirmities, as we see it as observers and monitors of Indian education, is that there's a wide disconnect between university and industry. And I think one of the things that what you're trying in your Marwadi University is trying to bridge this divide and make it a closer connection. So would you like to say, does the policy enable you to do this, or does it make it easier to do this?
The reason for the disconnect, particularly the industry, is basically looking at...
Please speak up a bit, doctor. We can't hear you.
So particularly the industry is basically looking up at a finished product. So the day student graduates, he or she must be employable and deployable. That's what they're looking. And the industry is not ready even to inch behind to tag on with the educational institution to make them employable, right? This is the disconnect. Now they have got their own policies, they have got their own understandings, because, every knowledge, information, or whatever it is, sellable today. There are lots of industries who are producers of knowledge, who are producers of skill, and they have taken it as a business. Now, what is happening is, if we want to make them, so that means we are trying to tap knowledge at the leading edge and get it to the premise of the classroom. And unless and until there is an interaction happening between them, nothing is going to happen. The industry is going to go its way and the education. So the only thing that sails from the industry to us is a mere 200 or 100 or 50 page report, and which the faculty has to read, or the student actually submits before the team, so that they can. So how do we tap knowledge at the leading edge? The only way to do, we do have mechanisms like industry institution interactions, training, and things like that, but they really don't help, because once in a while is not. It is something which has to be routinized. It is something which has to be brought into a systemic way, so that the student can constantly be put into that equipment or device or that mechanism.
So Dr. Costa, do you have a lot of people from industry, leaders of industry, on your board of governors or advising your faculty on a continuous basis?
Yes, we do have a lot of people from industries who are coming here regularly. They are coming here to take the courses. We have actually mapped the keywords of our course content with the industry technologies in those spaces. They are invited through webinars. They are invited physically following an industry visit. And then the interested student is actually given an idea to actually write down an idea, share it with the industry. And if the industry...
Sir, 1 minute. Do they help to shape your curriculum?
Yes.
That's very important.
That is exactly what I'm telling. So once they come into the premise of the educational institution, they share their ideas of the students. See, what is happening is industry. See, for example, anything. For example, I'm telling you the industry can make the next model. That is the next immediate model, or the model immediately after that can be made. But please believe me, I always told to the industry that if you want a model which you need to make after 5 years from now, for 10 years from now, then the students are the right. And that is the reason why you should come. So they are convinced. So if you want to make a model which is 5 years from now, BMW or iPhone or whatever, it's there in the minds of the students, because they have that thought, they have that idea, they have that conceived future. So it is not fun. They have multiple sets of future. So you can present them. You can actually share with them. That is what we are doing with the industry. They can share with them. They pick up, handpick those ideas, and then thereby actually give them those appropriate trainings and input so that they can actually simulate in the software, go back with the result. And if the industry feel right, they can fund them, they can spin them off as an entrepreneur or have a shareholding. Now that's the kind of model which we have. And we create a platform similar to Hackathon.
I'm very happy to hear that, because we've always been talking about, greater connect between industry and, yeah. So now I think we are done. Bhavin, you must have got a lot of questions.
Yeah, but best part is, I think so, Dr. Raj has been the best to reply almost to many of the questions and linking up, but I've got many questions. So if you allow me, I think so we'll take another 10 minutes. We'll overshoot by 10, 12 minutes, but there are some important questions that I need to post it to panelists. So I'll go. It's probably going to be
everybody involved. Yes.
Yeah. Probably this is going to be like a JEE test where you have less time and more questions. So let us get it fast. Okay, my first.
Hope it is going to be actually held.
It should be. Okay, so going with it, I think so. The first question is to Dr. Raj. This is largely to understand, will NEP 2020 implementation help India get more foreign students and also stop more students going abroad for studies?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that question, Bhavin. I think, see, one of the remarkable things about NEP is that it has come with the political and social capital of the Prime Minister of India, the Union Minister of Education, and of course, it has galvanized intellectual consciousness from the larger and the most wider, academic community. I mean, very few serious form of criticism from the policy has actually come in when it comes to higher education. There is a stronger criticism on the school education front, but by and large, higher education institutions have welcomed it. So that's already a good thing. But whether this actually will translate into the person that you're talking about, there's immense potential. I don't think the NEP actually speaks about it. There are other policies, like, for example, stay in India and study in India and things like that. Listen, we have a potential here. I mean, I cannot imagine if a small country like Australia, with a relatively, shorter history of higher education, could become one of the world's superpowers when it comes to, having the second, education contributes in largest second when it comes to GDP contribution. With India's history and civilizational heritage that Dr. Gostar talked about, there is immense opportunity. But in the current way in which we are functioning, absolutely impossible for we to be able to actually think about international students preferring and India becoming a higher education destination. If you ask me whether NEP has laid the foundation for that future, absolutely it has. And now it's a question of how the regulatory bodies, civil servants, bureaucrats, and I dare say educationists, vice chancellors, administrators, if all of us are able to become much more open and willing to bring that imagination and shed our own biases and prejudices and create that framework, we can very well become a destination for the world. And we have the entire African continent, the South Asian, and as well as the East Asia, where millions of students will be keen to receive affordable, high quality education, and India could be their destiny.
Yeah, and already I think a lot of Indian students are not going abroad because of the rise of the new private universities. Am I right?
Absolutely, no doubt about it, Dilip, and that's exactly the case with at least our university, but I can name a few more where people are increasingly preferring in many disciplines India over other universities, particularly in undergrad education. So that's another important reform we need to, and NEP does focus on that. The 4-year undergraduate program, the flexibility across different levels, the entry and exit points. This has the potential to radically reimagine our undergraduate education, which I must confess for a very long time, barring the professional education such as medicine and engineering, is largely been neglected. So that again provides an extraordinary opportunity for India.
Thank you, Dr. Raj. Mr. Krishna, you wanted to add on it? You had raised your finger? Because there are a couple of more questions coming up, but I want to first ask question to Lieutenant General Venkatesh. This question goes, I think so you touched upon the point on the new National Research Foundation. So it's a comment which has a last question. There are a lot of motivation to do research, particularly for state-run institutions. Despite there were clear incentive offered by RUSA, even top state universities were not able to attract research grants under this component. So while you are optimistic, do you really see that this is going to be utilized?
Yeah, I would think that this would be utilized, because this is widening the canvas. RUSA and other things, they never supported private universities. They were only looking at supporting, the state-run universities, state-run institutions, where perhaps the infrastructure and the drive was not available to carry on research. But there are, plenty of opportunities now to do quality research in, higher education institutions. And what is more interesting is the policy itself. It is talking about converting all Indian universities into 3 categories. One would be the universities which will, predominantly concentrate on research and delivery of education. Second is delivery of education and research. Third would be autonomous degree granting institutions. So this total, revamp of the university education system is going to drive this research, this thing. And honestly, I'm telling you, though, currently the rankings and ratings which every university is looking at and is want to be at the top, 30%, most ranking agencies grant up to 30 to 35% as the research output as a major component. So this itself will be a good, healthy competition amongst universities to avail this research grants to produce quality papers. The other thing which is going to help us would be, one thing all of us have been talking about internationalization. I think internally, all of us need to look at how are we going to collaborate within our own universities. In fact, it should begin at home. I think I would first feel that, we should establish a mechanism wherein there is faculty exchange, student exchange, research collaborations in a more formal way amongst our own universities. And then, of course, internationalization is again a very noble concept which the NEP drives. Therefore, I'm very convinced that the research grant, if it is administered the way it is supposed to be administered in the NEP, is going to drive research to the next level. And the research output will be of highest quality. And I'm sure it will also generate a lot of quality publications and innovations in the course of time.
Thank you, sir. Just for your information, sir, Education World kickstarted a HEAD movement, that is Alliance of Higher Education Advancement and Development, which actually spoke about the integration of the universities and work amongst India and a lot of counterparts. Mr. Krishna, I want to come to you on the question of this reimagining vocational education. The question is, vocational education is high on practice and interest rather than a curriculum or pedagogical exercise. Hence, it would be crucial to understand NCIVE, that's a vocational education program or the body, for integrating a different education pattern in mainstream education. Do you think that NCIVE should look at vocational as a subject, as a different education pattern in mainstream education?
Yeah, I think very clearly we need to have a greater practical focus in education. And if there is a clear pathway for people to move from vocational to the regular academic stream and vice versa, that would be very helpful. This again is not a new idea. The National Skills Development Framework, which has been in force now for a few years, was trying to create the platform for that to happen. But like many other cases, it's not really happened to the extent that we hoped for. So I hope the latest initiative in the education policy will facilitate that. But there is really a lot of rethinking that all of us need to do. I think traditional academic institutions tend to, to be honest, look down on vocational education, but vocational education is extremely important to develop the kind of skills, particularly in application areas, that will help the country be more competitive, prosperous, get more jobs, etc. And people who do vocational courses should definitely have the opportunity to get a higher level degree if they require it, if they have the aspiration for it, if they have the capability for it, etc. So to be honest with you, I haven't read the vocational section of the education policy with as much care as I should have, but I did see the general philosophy, and it seems to be promoting this kind of transferability and movement, and that's certainly something that's very badly needed.
Yeah,
I think these are questions which are coming in from our listeners, right?
I have one.
Yeah. There are. Yes, sure, Dr. Costa. I'm coming to you. That I'm also adding some of the points with the questions are somewhere already posted, so that it becomes a proper question.
I have one sentence to add.
Sure.
I have understood right from when I migrated from industry, working in US and everything. See, education.
No, we can't hear you. Speak up, doctor.
Yeah. So what I have to add is education, let us understand, is not a science. It's not an exact science that it has to be delivered this way, this way, this way. And nobody is here to say the university, no regulatory body is here to say the university, you do it like this, like this, like this, because it is not an exact science. Second thing is, in India, education starts from the womb.
From the womb.
Yes.
From the womb.
Right? So let us not forget Abhimanyu and Subhadra and Arjuna was telling. Right? And now it is the science which they are actually looking at. Right? Now, as far as other, with all respect to everybody, this is my just thoughts. I'm not against anybody or, for all these people, not the policy, anything. But what I want to say is, why are we lagging? Where are we? We are not lagging. India is never lagging. See, our education system is one of the best. See, today, why people are not collaborating? See, our textile industry is very good. Our design industry is very good. Our entrepreneurship industry is where you go to the villages, you see people doing lots of things with a lot of thrown away things and everything like that. Is it not important? I had known an IIM professor who was doing this, right? So these are the areas: textile hai, education hai, jewelry hai, other culinary arts hai, fashion hai, kapde hai, cloth. Lot of things are there where the foreign institutions can come and design. And then we can actually bring in our engineering and scientific practices and actually, tailor make.
So, sir, Sanjay Thakur is asking the same question. Sanjay Thakur is asking the same question to you, that Dr. Costa, how introduction of Sanskrit is going to change India's educational landscape? Please help me understand.
See, actually, there is shortage of time. There is paucity of time. Now, please read. If you just Google, it will tell you that Sanskrit is one of the most suitable language for computers. Right? This is, I think, this statement actually, so you can joyfully go and read, because if I start explaining, then, it will take a lot of time and there is paucity of time. So let us understand, it is not about it. Why only engineering? Why only technology? There are so many rural techniques and technology. Second thing is, in our education system, we have not talked about people who are underprivileged. We have taken up at Marwadi University fast moving programs, which we call people who are not able, who are dropouts. We have not talked about them anywhere in the policy, right? What about dropouts? How are we going to fund them rather than funding the people who are having billion? I don't see a country with 1.3 billion people and 800 million in the age group between 15 to 30, not brimming with energy and ideas. So many ideas. So therefore,
Dr. Costa, you are firm belief that Sanskrit is going to change the educational landscape. There is a science behind it.
Yeah, they can see it, and we have a billion people here, and we are billions of ideas per second. If you actually calculate mathematically, every day 600 good ideas are coming. And why we cannot translate it into actions? Because we have Digital India, Make in India, Startup India, all conceived between 2014 to 2016. Now all these things, now people now that startup is somewhere around, we have around something like if I'm correct, 50,000 and around 9,000 tech companies are there with 26 billion US dollar in
Understood,
all
sir.
these things are there. So we need to
Great.
this one, and we need to put in the right steps with the right attributes in terms of subjective as well as objective, and then come
Fine.
over. It will happen.
No, thank you. Thank you very much,
People
sir.
will be willing to come here and then, you know,
Sure.
take on and stay here in this country.
Last two questions. Last two questions. One to Mr. Krishnan, then to Dr. Raj. Mr. Krishna, the question come here from Sumaya Deep Ghosh is, will not autonomy increase course fees, which will destroy inclusiveness of education?
Difficult to say. I think, I think there are challenges. I think we have to face up to some of them. If you want to run good, high quality education, there are certain costs involved. You need to pay faculty well, you need good infrastructure, you need labs, you need IT infrastructure, whatever, you need all those things. So it is no point in pretending that those things don't have costs associated with them. Now, clearly, those costs have to be covered in some way or the other. Either they have to be covered through endowments or through government grants or through fees. I mean, there are pretty well understood ways in which those costs have to be covered. Now, I think the good thing about the new education policy is we are going to hopefully get good support for research. So let's assume that a lot of research costs can be met from the NRF. We luckily have the other programs of the government, like of the Department of Science and Technology and other ministries, which also support a lot of scientific and engineering research. But there's still going to be costs of campus, infrastructure, faculty, etc., that have to be met. The government system, at least in its traditional form, has large subsidies or grants from the government, which brings down the cost. If it's a private institution or even a self-funded institution like an IIM, this costs have to be met by all the stakeholders. And unfortunately, there's no way of running away from that. What we do, and we do quite effectively, is we ensure that anyone who qualifies for admission is not prevented from joining our institute because of lack of money. We have a very vibrant financial aid program in all the IIMs and of course in many other institutions as well. And that financial aid program takes care of students who are otherwise qualified to attend but don't have the money. So I think that's the way most global higher education works, except in some countries. I mean, in Europe, for example, it's a little different, but many other countries it works that way. Either it's government funded or it runs on scholarships and financial aid and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Last question to Dr. Raj. This is on curbing the commercialization of education, which has been taking the center stage. Is the surplus generated allowed to be reinvested under the larger areas of education sector and not be restricted to the activity from which the surplus is generated?
All right. Thank you so much, Bhavin. I also share Dr. Krishnan's point of view on the question of providing access. We have a very skewed understanding of access to education. I strongly believe that a lot of people who should be, anybody who can't afford should be provided help and support. And as Dr. Krishnan said, it has to be either coming through state funding, particularly for public institutions, or if it's philanthropically enabled through private institutions. I mean, I had the privilege to receive the Rhodes Scholarship. I come from a middle-class family in India. I simply couldn't have gone to Oxford, but for the fact that I got 100% funding. I got a similar 100% scholarship to Harvard, and that enabled me to be educated in those institutions. Now, these are all, but Harvard got the money, Oxford got the money, but I didn't pay for it. So we really need to think in terms of how we have structured our education. As far as the point about commercialization is concerned, I have long been arguing, and Dilip also may not sometimes agree with me on that. We absolutely need only not-for-profit private institutions, in the sense that those people who have made enough money, I'm speaking about higher education, not schools, those who have made enough money, who have enough resources, and who are not going to use the university or the higher education institution as a source of income for their livelihood or business or other types of things, only they should be setting up higher education institutions. Because, as Dr. Krishnan and all of us know, in higher education, if you really do it well, you cannot have any savings. You only keep spending. There is nothing called savings. You keep on spending because you are constantly investing, whether it is in infrastructure, whether it is in scholarships, whether it is in research, whether it is in any other access. So if that is what it is, the so-called return on investment is a very, it's only possible through a lot of resources and in later years, alumni funding, endowments, foundations, and all of that. So I believe commercialization of higher education can only be stopped if we allow people who are philanthropists who can come into education. Unfortunately, the current system has created enough disincentives for people, genuine philanthropists, to come into education. It has created huge incentives for fly-by-night operators, dubious people, all kinds of characters to come into education, to see education, higher education, as a business opportunity.
Understood.
Hello, Raj. The Supreme Court has allowed education to be a vocation, as a fundamental right, out of which you can make reasonable profit. So that would contradict what you say.
Yes, I will disagree with the Supreme Court of India on that, because I do think that I'm very convinced. I cannot imagine there is a single university in the world, a single private university in the world, which is good and which is for profit. I don't know of a single university among the 36,000 universities in the world which is good and which is for profit. All good private universities are not for profit.
Not for profit is the way for India shining. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Dilip, your closing comment, and then Mindler team does the honor.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, everybody. Very stimulating discussion, certainly very enlightening. As you know, I'm just a reporter, a journalist, and I'm very pleased that all of you made the time to come here to educate me and to educate the thousands of people who are watching this show. Thank you very much, Raj, Dr. Costa, General Venkatesh, and Ms. Dr. Krishnan. Thank you very much. And Parikshit and Prateek, also thanks a lot for Mindler for making this possible.
Thank you, Dilip.
Thank you, Dilip. Thank you, Bhavin.
Thank you. Let Parikshit. Yeah.
First of all, thanks to our esteemed panel. I was watching you like a kid, like a kid just listening to. It was a beautiful, insightful. Each one of you has given us your perspective, and we can't agree more with you. First of all, General Venkatesh, thank you so much. Dr. Costa, Dr. Rajkumar, Professor Rishikesh Krishnan. It's been an honor, and I can vouch for, we still have about 400 plus attendees, even after 1 hour, 20 minutes, who are not going. It's because it's been a mesmerizing discussion, and you have been, it's been a beautiful dialogue and very insightful. And Dilip, I can't thank you enough. You tried to bring in the editor in you and took them in every direction possible. Thank you so much and Bhavin, we can't thank you enough. You've always been a great support. So we at Mindler are indebted to Education World and to our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much. And I can safely say on behalf of all our attendees, they would have enjoyed it thoroughly.
Part 2 is coming.
Yes.
Picture baki hai.
Yeah.
Isha, you want to round up?
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. I think everyone summed it up beautifully. Thank you so much to all our panelists. Thank you so much to EW. Just wanted to sum it up by letting everybody who's a part of the ICC program know that we start tomorrow morning sharp at 8:45. I know it's a Sunday morning, but I'm sure it's going to be very fruitful. And we also have another panel discussion tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. And we look forward to having you participate for that discussion as well. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you for taking your Saturday evening out.
Thank you all very much. It was a wonderful opportunity for me, and great interacting with all of you out there. Look forward to our next occasion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Parikshit ji, and thank you, Dilip and Bhavin, and of course, my good friends around in the Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, chalo. Bye-bye.
Well, I was.
Were you happy? Our sponsors?
Brilliant. Dilip, I was just waiting for a guest to part, and we still have 300 plus 350 guests still waiting. Thank you so much. Shubharatri. Take care. We'll see you tomorrow. You've been wonderful. God bless you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, good night.
Good night.